He was just a quiet bartender, mixing drinks at the city's most exclusive charity gala, invisible to the glittering crowd of power players and millionaires. Until six masked figures stormed through the ballroom doors and seized the tech billionaire everyone had come to celebrate. No one knew what he'd done before pouring cocktails. No one suspected what he was capable of. But when his young daughter tugged his sleeve and whispered, "Dad, that lady looks scared," something inside him snapped awake. What happened in those next 8 minutes would reveal a past buried deep, expose a conspiracy reaching the highest corridors of wealth, and ignite a connection neither of them saw coming. This isn't just about a hero saving the day. This is a story about second chances, the courage to trust again, and the quiet strength of a man who left violence behind but would unleash it one last time to protect someone who desperately needed saving. Before we jump back in, tell us where you're tuning in from, and if this story touches you, make sure you're subscribed because tomorrow, I've saved something extra special for you. The Pacific wind swept through downtown San Diego with a whisper of salt and possibilities, carrying with it the distant sound of waves crashing against the harbor below. The Meridian Grand Ballroom sat perched on the 20th floor of the Harborview Tower, its floor-to-ceiling windows offering a panoramic view of the glittering city lights and the dark expanse of ocean beyond. Tonight, the ballroom was alive, with the kind of wealth that didn't need to announce itself. It simply existed, draped in custom tailoring, dripping from champagne flutes, and humming in the low murmur of powerful conversations. The annual Tech Innovators Charity Gala was the event of the season. 500 guests, each ticket costing more than most people's monthly rent, gathered beneath crystal chandeliers that cast prismatic light across marble floors. A string quartet played Vivaldi near the grand staircase, while waiters in crisp white jackets glided through the crowd, carrying trays of caviar blinis and truffle-infused hors d'oeuvres. Outside the main entrance, a red carpet stretched toward a lineup of black limousines and sports cars that cost more than homes. But beneath all the glamour, beneath the carefully curated smiles and the clinking of crystal, there was something else in the air tonight. Something unsettled, like the moment before a storm breaks. The security team stationed at each exit tried to blend into the background, their earpieces barely visible, their eyes constantly scanning. The event coordinator checked her tablet for the 15th time, her perfectly painted lips pressed into a thin line of worry. And at the far end of the ballroom, behind the sleek modern bar constructed specifically for this evening, a man worked in silence, his hands moving with practiced efficiency as he mixed drinks and observed everything. No one paid attention to him. That was how he preferred it. His name was Garrett Flynn, though the name tag pinned to his black vest simply read, "Staff." He stood 6 feet tall with broad shoulders that filled out his uniform just a little too well, suggesting a physicality that went beyond the typical bartender build. His dark hair was cut short and neat, showing the first hints of silver at the temples, and his face carried the kind of rugged handsomeness that came not from genetics alone, but from years of weathering life's harder edges. His eyes, a deep stormy gray, moved across the room with the kind of awareness that most people never develop, cataloging exits, noting patterns, reading body language with the precision of someone trained to survive. He'd been working events like this for the past 2 years, ever since he'd left his old life behind and settled into the quiet anonymity of civilian work. The pay was decent, the hours flexible enough to accommodate his responsibilities at home, and most importantly, nobody asked questions. Nobody cared that he'd once been someone else entirely. Nobody knew about the missions he couldn't talk about, the places he'd been that didn't officially exist, or the things he'd done that kept him awake some nights, staring at the ceiling while the weight of memory pressed down on his chest. Tonight should have been like any other gig: mix the drinks, smile politely, collect the paycheck, and go home. But something felt off. Garrett couldn't quite name it, couldn't point to any single detail that triggered his instincts. But after 12 years in naval special operations, he'd learned to trust that uncomfortable prickling sensation at the back of his neck. The feeling that said danger was circling, patient and hungry, waiting for the right moment to strike. He poured a whiskey neat for a silver-haired executive and slid it across the polished bar top, his gaze sweeping the room again. Most of the guests were exactly what they appeared to be: tech entrepreneurs, venture capitalists, philanthropists with more money than purpose. But there were others, scattered throughout the crowd, who didn't quite fit. A man in an ill-fitting tuxedo standing near the east exit who hadn't moved in 20 minutes. A woman by the silent auction table, whose eyes kept darting to her phone, her thumb tapping in a rhythm that seemed deliberate. 3 men who'd arrived separately but now stood in a loose triangle formation around the main stage, their postures too rigid, too alert. Garrett's jaw tightened. He reached beneath the bar and touched the small phone he kept tucked in his pocket, a cheap burner that only had 2 numbers programmed into it: his babysitter's and 911. He hoped he wouldn't need either tonight. Behind him, through the service door that led to the kitchen corridor, he could hear the soft sound of humming. His daughter, Zoe, sat on a folding chair just inside the hallway, her legs swinging as she worked on a coloring book spread across her lap. She was 8 years old, with her mother's dark curls and his gray eyes, and she had a smile that could crack open the hardest parts of his heart. "Dad," she called softly through the doorway, knowing better than to come out into the event space. "Can I have some juice?" Garrett glanced over his shoulder and saw her peering around the doorframe, her face smudged with a bit of blue marker. "Apple or orange?" "Apple, please." He grabbed a small bottle from the service fridge and walked it back to her, crouching down to her level. "You doing okay, kiddo?" Zoe nodded, showing him her coloring page, an elaborate scene of underwater creatures swimming through coral reefs. "I'm making the octopus purple because purple is a happy color." "Smart choice." He brushed a curl from her forehead. "Remember our rule. Stay here, stay quiet, and if you say the special word, I go to the back room and lock the door." She recited it like a well-practiced lesson, which it was. "That's my girl." He kissed the top of her head. "I'll check on you in a bit." Back at the bar, the crowd had thickened. Garrett moved through orders with mechanical precision: mojitos, martinis, old fashions, his hands working while his mind stayed sharp, stayed watchful. The string quartet transitioned into something more contemporary, and the energy in the room shifted as the main lights dimmed slightly and a spotlight illuminated the stage at the far end of the ballroom. A woman stepped into that circle of light, and the room seemed to inhale, collectively. She wore a midnight blue gown that moved like liquid silk, elegant and understated in a way that paradoxically drew every eye in the room. Her auburn hair was swept up in a classic style that showcased high cheekbones and striking green eyes. She moved with the kind of confidence that came from commanding boardrooms and making decisions that affected thousands of lives. But there was something else there too, a tightness around her eyes, a guardedness in her smile that suggested the weight of the crown she wore was heavier than anyone knew. Hannah Clark. Even Garrett, who deliberately avoided following tech news or business headlines, knew who she was. At 36, she was the founder and CEO of Nexus Technologies, a company that had revolutionized data security and made her one of the youngest self-made billionaires in the country. Her face had been on magazine covers, her TED Talk had millions of views, and her name carried the kind of power that opened doors and moved markets. She was brilliant, driven, and according to every profile piece ever written about her, completely alone. She stepped up to the microphone, and the room fell silent. "Good evening," Hannah began, her voice clear and steady despite the exhaustion Garrett could see etched into the fine lines around her eyes. "Thank you all for being here tonight. Your generosity supports programs that bring technology education to underserved communities, and I'm honored to stand before such compassionate individuals." The words were perfect, rehearsed, professional. But Garrett noticed the way her hand trembled slightly as she gripped the podium, noticed the quick glance she threw toward the exits, as if calculating escape routes, noticed the way her smile never quite reached her eyes. And then he noticed something else. The 3 men he'd been watching earlier were moving. Not obviously, not in any way that would alarm the average person, but with a coordinated precision that made Garrett's pulse quicken. They were closing in on the stage from different angles, their hands reaching inside their jackets. The feeling at the back of his neck exploded into full-blown alarm. Hannah Clark had perfected the art of the smile that meant nothing. She'd learned it early, back when she was just another ambitious programmer with a dream too big for the tiny apartment she could barely afford. She'd learned it in boardrooms full of men who assumed she was there to take notes, in investor meetings where she had to work twice as hard to earn half the respect, and in interviews where reporters asked about her personal life instead of her company's groundbreaking encryption algorithms. The smile said, "I'm fine, I'm strong, I'm untouchable." Even when she felt like she was drowning. Preparing and narrating this story took us a lot of time, so if you are enjoying it, subscribe to our channel, it means a lot to us. Now back to the story. Tonight, that smile was working overtime. Hannah stood at the podium, the spotlight turning her into a symbol rather than a person, and delivered the speech she'd practiced a dozen times. She talked about opportunity and innovation, about bridging the digital divide and empowering the next generation. She hit every talking point, paused for applause in all the right places, and projected the image of a woman who had it all figured out. But beneath the carefully constructed facade, her mind was racing with thoughts that had nothing to do with charitable giving or corporate responsibility. The threats had started 3 weeks ago. At first, they were easy to dismiss: vague emails that security flagged as spam, anonymous messages on social media from accounts that disappeared as quickly as they appeared. But then the messages became more specific. They mentioned her home address, her daily routine, the coffee shop she stopped at every Tuesday morning. They referenced confidential business deals that shouldn't have been public knowledge. And 2 days ago, someone had left a black envelope on her car windshield with a single photograph inside, a picture of her walking into her office building, with a red circle drawn around her head. Her head of security, a former FBI agent named Patricia Vance, had wanted to cancel tonight's event. "We can't guarantee your safety in a crowd this size," Patricia had argued during their last meeting. "The venue has too many access points, too many variables. If someone wants to make a move, this is the perfect opportunity." But Hannah had refused. Canceling would show weakness, would give power to whoever was behind the threats. She'd built Nexus Technologies from nothing, survived a hostile takeover attempt, navigated a public divorce that had been designed to humiliate her, and emerged stronger every time. She wasn't about to let some coward with a camera change her plans. So here she stood, delivering her speech, while her security team hovered nervously in the background, and her instincts screamed that something was very, very wrong. Hannah's life had become a strange paradox. She had everything she'd ever worked for: wealth, influence, respect, and yet she felt emptier now than when she'd been struggling to make rent. Success had come at a cost she hadn't fully calculated. Her marriage had collapsed under the weight of 16-hour workdays and a husband who resented being Mr. Hannah Clark. Her friendships had withered as old friends grew uncomfortable with her wealth, and new acquaintances only saw her as a networking opportunity. Her family, never particularly close to begin with, now called only when they needed something: money, connections, tickets to exclusive events. She'd sacrificed relationships for boardroom victories, traded intimacy for innovation, and somewhere along the way, she'd forgotten what it felt like to be seen as Hannah rather than as the CEO of Nexus Technologies. The irony wasn't lost on her. She'd built a company focused on security and protection. Yet she felt more vulnerable and exposed than ever before. Tonight's gala was supposed to be different. It was a charity event, something good and pure. A chance to give back and feel like her success meant something beyond stock prices and market valuations. She'd personally overseen every detail, from the selection of the benefiting organizations to the menu choices. She'd wanted it to be perfect, a reminder to herself that there was still humanity beneath the corporate armor. Instead, she felt like a target in a shooting gallery. Hannah wrapped up her speech with the planned closing remarks, thanking sponsors and encouraging continued support. The applause was enthusiastic, almost thunderous, and she stepped back from the podium with that practiced smile still firmly in place. Patricia appeared at her elbow immediately, her expression neutral but her eyes sharp with concern. "We should move you to the VIP lounge," Patricia murmured. "You've made your appearance. Let's get you somewhere more secure." Hannah nodded. But before she could move, she was intercepted by donors wanting photographs, board members needing quick decisions, and journalists requesting comments. This was the price of the spotlight. You couldn't just step off the stage when you wanted to. You had to perform until the very end, shaking hands and making small talk, while your feet ached in designer heels and your face hurt from maintaining that empty smile. Through the crowd, her eyes landed on the bar at the far end of the ballroom. The bartender working there was different from the others, something about the way he held himself, the intensity of his focus. While everyone else in the room was either performing or being performed for, he seemed to exist in a separate reality, observing rather than participating. Their eyes met for just a fraction of a second, and Hannah felt an unexpected jolt of recognition, though she was certain they'd never met before. There was something in his gaze, not admiration or interest or any of the typical reactions she'd grown accustomed to, but rather a kind of steady awareness, as if he saw through the CEO costume straight to the exhausted woman underneath. It was unsettling and oddly comforting at the same time. The moment passed. Hannah was pulled into another conversation, this time with a tech journalist from a major publication who wanted to discuss Nexus's expansion plans. She answered on autopilot, her PR training kicking in, delivering sound bites that said a lot without revealing anything substantive. But part of her mind was still on the bartender, on that moment of connection that had felt more real than any interaction she'd had all evening. Patricia appeared again, more insistent this time. "Miss Clark, I really think we should—" The lights went out. For a heartbeat, there was only darkness and confused silence. Then the emergency lighting kicked in, bathing the ballroom in an eerie red glow. Gasps rippled through the crowd, followed by nervous laughter as people assumed it was a technical glitch, something that would be resolved in moments. But Hannah felt Patricia's hand grip her arm with bruising force, felt herself being yanked backward, and heard Patricia's voice, tight with controlled panic. "Get down. Now." That's when she saw them. 6 figures in black tactical gear and masks moving through the crowd with terrifying efficiency. They weren't random attackers. This was planned, coordinated, professional. And they were coming straight for her. The moment the lights went out, Garrett Flynn was already moving. His hand shot beneath the bar. Grabbing the small tactical flashlight he kept hidden there, a habit from his old life that most people would have called paranoid. He clicked it on, the beam cutting through the red-tinged darkness, and his mind instantly shifted into the operational mode he'd tried so hard to leave behind. He had maybe 3 seconds before chaos erupted. 3 seconds to make decisions that would determine whether people lived or died. The training he'd received at the Naval Special Warfare Center in Coronado flooded back like muscle memory. Assess, adapt, act. He'd spent 12 years as a Navy SEAL, running operations in places that didn't exist on official maps, learning to function in situations where one wrong move meant body bags and flag-draped coffins. He'd left that world behind 2 years ago after his wife, Sarah, had died in a car accident, leaving him alone to raise their daughter. He'd promised Zoe that he was done with violence, done with the life that had already cost him too much. But some promises were meant to be broken. "Zoe," he called sharply toward the service corridor, his voice cutting through the confused murmurs of the crowd. Red signal. It was the code they'd practiced. Red signal meant danger, meant she needed to get to the secure room in the back of the kitchen and lock herself in until he came for her. He heard the quick patter of her footsteps, heard the service door close and lock, and felt a fraction of his focus return to the ballroom, where all hell was about to break loose. The 6 masked figures had fanned out across the room with military precision. 2 were moving toward the stage, where Hannah Clark stood frozen. Patricia, trying to shield her with her own body. 2 more were blocking the main exits, weapons now visible in their hands, not guns. Garrett noted with professional detachment, but tasers and what looked like tranquilizer devices. This wasn't a murder attempt. This was an extraction, a kidnapping executed by people who knew exactly what they were doing. The remaining 2 attackers were crowd control, barking orders for everyone to get on the ground, using fear to paralyze the wealthy guests who had probably never experienced real violence in their comfortable lives. Screams erupted across the ballroom. People dropped to the blank stairs, marble floor, covering their heads, while others fled toward the exits, only to be turned back by the masked figures stationed there. Garrett's tactical assessment took less than 2 seconds. 6 hostiles, professional-grade training, objective clear capture, Hannah Clarke. The building's security would respond, but not fast enough. SDPD would be called, but even with the police station only a few blocks away, response time in this traffic would be at least 4 minutes. A lot could happen in 4 minutes. A kidnapping could be completed. A helicopter could land on the roof. A target could disappear forever. He looked at Hannah Clarke, still on the stage, and saw the terror in her eyes. Saw Patricia Vance trying to move her toward the back exit behind the curtain. Saw the 2 attackers closing in, moving with the confidence of people who'd never failed a mission before. And in that moment, Garrett Flynn made a choice that would unravel every carefully constructed boundary he'd built around his new life. He vaulted over the bar with fluid grace, his body remembering movements he'd drilled thousands of times. The closest attacker, a large figure moving to intercept the fleeing guests, never saw him coming. Garrett's approach was silent, efficient, a ghost materializing from the darkness. His arm locked around the man's throat in a textbook rear naked choke, applying pressure to the carotid arteries with precise control. The attacker struggled for 3 seconds, then went limp. Garrett lowered him to the ground and relieved him of his taser in one smooth motion. The second attacker near the exit noticed his partner go down. West Side compromised. He barked into his comm system, his voice mechanically distorted through the mask. "We have interference." Garrett didn't give him time to process the situation. He moved laterally, using the panicked crowd as cover, staying low and fast. The ballroom had transformed into a nightmare of red emergency lighting, scattered bodies on the floor, and the acid smell of fear. Crystal chandeliers swayed overhead from the sudden movement below, casting dancing shadows that made it harder to track threats. This was good. Chaos was his element, the environment where all his training came alive. The attacker at the exit raised his taser, trying to acquire a target in the confusion. Garrett was already inside his range, coming in at an angle the man hadn't anticipated. A quick strike to the wrist knocked the weapon free, followed by a knee to the solar plexus that folded the attacker forward. Garrett's elbow came down hard on the back of the man's neck, controlled force, enough to incapacitate but not kill, and the second hostile dropped. "We've got a problem," another voice crackled through the fallen attacker's comm piece. "Someone's taking out our team." "Neutralize the target first," came the response. "Deal with interference after." Garrett grabbed the comm unit from the unconscious attacker's ear and crushed it under his heel. 2 down, 4 to go. But the remaining hostiles were adapting, moving faster now, abandoning subtlety for speed. On the stage, he could see Hannah Clarke being forced backward by 2 masked figures, while Patricia Vance fought like a cornered animal, throwing elbows and kicks that showed decent training, but not enough to overcome 2 professional operators. Patricia took a taser hit to the ribs and went down hard, her body convulsing. Hannah screamed and tried to run, but one of the attackers caught her arm and twisted it behind her back with brutal efficiency. She cried out in pain, and something primal ignited in Garrett's chest, the same protective rage that had made him volunteer for the most dangerous missions, the instinct that had kept his team alive through impossible odds. He was 30 feet away, too far to reach her before they could inject her with whatever was in the syringe one attacker was now pulling from his tactical vest. Time compressed into crystalline clarity, every detail sharp and vivid. The attacker's thumb moving to remove the syringe cap, Hannah's eyes wide with terror. Patricia on the ground, trying to rise, despite the electricity still coursing through her nervous system. The remaining 2 crowd control hostiles turning toward him, finally recognizing the real threat. Garrett did the math in his head. If he went for Hannah, the 2 crowd control hostiles would be on him before he could extract her. If he engaged them first, Hannah would be unconscious in seconds. There was no good option, only the least bad one. He needed a force multiplier, something to even the odds. His eyes locked onto the dessert table, 15 feet to his right specifically. onto the elaborate ice sculpture centerpiece, a abstract representation of technology and innovation that probably cost more than his monthly rent. It was massive, easily 50 pounds of carved ice sitting on a wheeled serving cart. Garrett sprinted toward it, grabbed the cart's handle, and sent it rolling with all his strength directly toward the stage. The cart picked up speed, the ice sculpture glinting in the emergency lighting like a crystalline missile. One of the crowd control attackers saw it coming and tried to dodge, but the cart clipped his legs and sent him sprawling. The sculpture continued its trajectory, hit the stage stairs, and exploded in a spectacular shower of ice shards that momentarily distracted everyone in the vicinity. Garrett used that 2-second window. He closed the distance to the stage in a dead sprint, his body moving with the kind of fluid violence that came from thousands of hours of close-quarters combat training. The first attacker holding Hannah never saw the flying knee that caught him in the temple. He released her and staggered backward, dazed. The second attacker, the one with the syringe, spun toward Garrett, but Garrett was already inside his guard. A quick disarm, a throw that used the man's own momentum against him, and the attacker hit the stage floor hard enough to crack the wood. Hannah stumbled, nearly falling, and Garrett caught her elbow, steadying her. "Are you hurt?" She stared at him with wild, disbelieving eyes. "You're the bartender." "Not exactly. Can you run?" Before she could answer, the final crowd control attacker opened fire, not with a taser but with something that made sharp pneumatic coughs. Tranquilizer darts. One buried itself in the stage curtain inches from Hannah's head. Garrett pulled her down, covering her body with his as 2 more darts whistled past. "Stage left exit," he said, his voice calm despite the adrenaline flooding his system. "Behind the curtain. When I move, you run. Don't stop. Don't look back. Find a room with a lock and barricade yourself inside until the police arrive. What about you?" "I'll be right behind you." It was a lie, but a necessary one. He couldn't leave until every threat was neutralized, until he was certain Zoe was safe in the back room, until he knew the hostiles weren't going to pursue. But Hannah didn't need to know that. He could hear sirens in the distance now, growing louder. The cavalry was coming, but they still had at least 2 minutes. 2 minutes where anything could happen. The attacker with the dart gun was repositioning, trying to get a clear shot. The man Garrett had hit with the flying knee was getting back up, shaking off the impact with the kind of resilience that spoke to serious training. And somewhere in this chaos, there were still 2 more hostiles unaccounted for. Garrett grabbed a fallen taser from the stage floor and checked the charge. Still active. He rose into a crouch, using Hannah's body as cover, his mind calculating angles and timing. The dart gunman was 20 feet away, partially concealed behind an overturned banquet table. The recovering attacker was 10 feet away and closing, reaching for something at his belt, probably a backup weapon. "On 3, Garrett said to Hannah. 1, 2. The explosion of sound came from the main entrance. Not gunfire, but something hitting the doors with tremendous force. The massive double doors buckled inward, their locks failing under the impact. 2 more masked figures entered, but these ones were different, larger, more heavily armored, and carrying equipment that looked far more lethal than tasers and tranquilizer guns. "Extraction team," the dart gunman called out. "We're blown. Grab the package and go." Garrett's jaw clenched. Package meant Hannah. And go meant they were about to abandon subtlety entirely and just shoot their way out with her in tow. The parameters of the engagement had just shifted from kidnapping to something far more desperate and dangerous. When people got desperate, they got sloppy. When they got sloppy, bystanders died. He couldn't let that happen. Not on his watch. Not while he still had breath in his body. "Change of plans," he told Hannah. "When I stand up, you grab Patricia and drag her backstage. Don't argue, just do it. But do it." Garrett stood, drawing every eye in the room to him. He faced the 7 remaining hostiles, the original 4 still standing, plus the 3 new arrivals, and for a moment, everything went still. They were sizing him up, trying to understand what they were dealing with. A brave civilian? A cop? Something else? One of the new arrivals tilted his head, studying Garrett with professional interest. When he spoke, his voice was different from the others, cultured, educated, almost amused. "You move like a seal. Are you a seal?" Garrett said nothing. Behind him, he could hear Hannah dragging Patricia toward the curtain, could hear the rustle of fabric as they disappeared backstage. Good. That was one variable removed from the equation. Strong, silent type. The man continued. "Admirable, but you're outnumbered 7-1, and we're on a schedule. Step aside, and nobody else gets hurt." "Can't do that." "Then you're going to die for someone you don't even know. Is that really worth it?" Garrett thought about Zoe, locked in the back room, probably terrified but safe. Thought about Sarah, who'd made him promise to always be the kind of man who stood between danger and the innocent. Thought about all the missions where he'd been willing to sacrifice everything for people he'd never met, because that was what the job demanded. He'd left the SEALs, but he'd never stopped being the man who ran toward gunfire when everyone else ran away. "Yeah," he said quietly. "It is." The cultured voice sighed. "Pity. Take him." They came at him in a coordinated assault, two from the front, one flanking left, another moving to cut off any retreat. Professional tactics, the kind taught in elite military schools and private security firms that catered to the morally flexible. Garrett had half a second to make a choice that would define the next 30 seconds of his life. He went forward. It was counterintuitive, exactly what they wouldn't expect. Instead of falling back or trying to defend, he charged directly at the two front attackers with explosive speed. The first one tried to grab him in a standard restraint hold mistake. Garrett slipped the grip with a movement so fluid it seemed choreographed, redirecting the attacker's momentum into a hip throw that sent the man crashing into his partner. Both went down in a tangle of limbs. The flanker on the left reached for him, fingers grasping for Garrett's shoulder. Garrett caught the wrist, twisted it into a compliance lock that forced the man to his knees, and delivered a precisely measured strike to the temple that shut down the attacker's consciousness, like flipping a light switch. 3 seconds, 3 attackers neutralized, but the remaining 4 were adapting, spreading out to surround him, no longer underestimating what they were dealing with. One of the new arrivals, the big one, probably 6'4" and 250 pounds of tactical gear and muscle, rushed him with the confidence of someone who'd won every bar fight they'd ever been in. Garrett sidestepped at the last possible moment, used the man's momentum to drive him face first into the edge of the stage with a sickening crunch. The big man dropped like a felled tree, but the distraction cost him. Pain exploded across Garrett's ribs as another attacker landed a solid kick, the impact driving the air from his lungs. He rolled with it, creating distance, and came up in a fighting stance that would have been immediately recognizable to anyone with close-quarters combat training. His breathing was controlled despite the pain, his eyes tracking multiple threats simultaneously, his body coiled and ready. The cultured voice spoke again, this time with genuine respect. "Not just a SEAL. You're a operator. Special operations. What were you? DevGru? Team 6? Garrett remained silent, his focus absolute. His ribs throbbed where he'd been kicked, probably cracked, definitely going to hurt like hell tomorrow, but pain was just information, and he'd learned long ago how to compartmentalize it during operations. 2 attackers moved in tandem, trying to overwhelm him with coordinated strikes. Garrett's training took over completely, his conscious mind stepping aside to let years of muscle memory and combat experience guide his movements. Block, parry, redirect, strike to the nerve cluster in the shoulder, elbow to the solar plexus, sweep the leg, control the fall. Every movement was efficient, economic, designed to neutralize threats with minimum energy expenditure. Because he was one against many, and stamina would be the deciding factor. One attacker went down, clutching his paralyzed arm. The other gasped for air, his diaphragm spasming from the elbow strike. Garrett didn't stop, didn't celebrate, just kept moving to the next threat. This was what he'd been trained for, to function in the chaos, to make split-second decisions under pressure, to survive when the odds said he should be dead. The sirens were much closer now, probably less than a minute out. The attackers heard them too. The cultured voice cursed in what sounded like Russian. Abort. Extraction failed. Scatter and evac. But one attacker, the Dart gunman, wasn't ready to give up. He raised his weapon, tracking not toward Garrett but toward the stage curtain where Hannah and Patricia had disappeared. If we can't have her, nobody can. Garrett saw the shot before it happened, saw the man's finger tightening on the trigger, saw the angle that would send the dart through the gap in the curtain directly toward where Hannah was likely taking cover. There was no time to close the distance, no time for a tactical solution. There was only instinct and the split-second decision to put his body between the weapon and the target. He moved. The dart hit him in the left shoulder, and immediately his arm went numb. Not just numb dead weight, completely unresponsive. The tranquilizer was strong, probably designed to drop someone in seconds. Garrett felt the chemical heat spreading from the injection site, felt his vision starting to blur at the edges. He had maybe 10 seconds of consciousness left, maybe less. 10 seconds to end this. He charged the Dart gunman with his remaining functional arm, covering the distance before the man could reload. A brutal strike to the throat collapsed the attacker's windpipe, sending him to the ground gasping. The cultured voice and the last standing attacker were already retreating toward the broken doors, smart enough to know when a mission was beyond salvaging. Garrett tried to pursue, but his legs weren't responding properly anymore. The tranquilizer was winning, pulling him down into darkness. He stumbled, caught himself on a banquet table, sent champagne flutes crashing to the floor. His vision tunneled, the red emergency lighting becoming a blur of color and shadow. The last thing he saw, before consciousness left him, was Hannah Clarke emerging from behind the curtain, her face a mask of shock and concern. The last thing he heard was her voice, sharp with command. Someone call an ambulance. Now. Then everything went black, and Garrett Flynn fell into a dreamless void where the sounds of sirens and shouting voices faded into nothing at all. Garrett woke to the sterile smell of antiseptic and the steady beep of medical equipment. His first thought was Zoe. His second was threat assessment. His body tried to jackknife upright, but pain lanced through his ribs, and a firm hand pressed against his chest, holding him down. Easy, sailor, you're safe. The voice was female, professional, with the no-nonsense tone of someone used to dealing with difficult patients. You're at UC San Diego Medical Center. You've been unconscious for 3 hours. His vision cleared slowly, the hospital room coming into focus. Fluorescent lights, pale green walls, an IV drip connected to his arm. A nurse stood beside his bed, middle-aged with kind eyes and a name tag that read Rodriguez. Beyond her, through the partially open door, he could see 2 uniformed police officers stationed in the hallway. My daughter, Garrett croaked, his throat raw. Zoe. She was in the kitchen at the venue. The little girl with the coloring books? She's fine. One of the event staff stayed with her until your emergency contact arrived. She's in the waiting room with, the nurse checked her chart, a Mrs. Chen from your building? The relief that washed over Garrett was so intense, it was almost painful. Mrs. Chen was his neighbor, a retired teacher who watched Zoe when he worked events. She was safe. His daughter was safe. Everything else was manageable. The tranquilizer they hit you with was industrial grade, Nurse Rodriguez continued, adjusting his IV. You're lucky, another few cc's, and you might not have woken up at all. As it is, you've got some bruised ribs, a mild concussion, and enough chemicals in your system to knock out a horse. You need to rest. The woman, Hannah Clarke. Is she? Miss Clarke is fine, thanks to you. She's been here for the past 2 hours, actually. Refused to leave until you woke up. The nurse smiled. You made quite an impression. Before Garrett could process that information, the door opened wider and Hannah Clarke walked in, followed by a man in an expensive suit who had lawyer written all over him. Hannah looked different from the polished CEO he'd seen at the gala. Her hair was down, her makeup smudged, and she wore jeans and a Stanford sweatshirt that made her look younger and more approachable. But her eyes were the same, intelligent, intense, and currently fixed on him with an expression he couldn't quite read. "You're awake," she said, and there was genuine relief in her voice. "I was starting to worry. I'm fine. Just need to." Garrett tried to sit up again and immediately regretted it as pain shot through his ribs. "You need to stay in that bed," Hannah said firmly, moving closer. "Doctor's orders, which I'm personally enforcing." She pulled a chair up beside his bed and sat down, studying him with open curiosity. "Garrett Flynn, that's your real name? How did you—" "I have excellent resources." A ghost of a smile touched her lips. "Also, the police ran your fingerprints. Turns out you're something of a legend in certain circles. 12 years as a Navy SEAL, 8 of those with SEAL Team 3, multiple deployments, commendations for valor I'm not cleared to know details about, and an honorable discharge 2 years ago." She paused. "What they don't have in their files is why a man with your background is bartending at charity events." Garrett met her gaze steadily. "I have my reasons." "I'm sure you do. Just like I'm sure you had reasons for putting yourself between me and 7 armed attackers when the smart thing would have been to run." Her voice softened. "Thank you. You saved my life tonight." "Anyone would have." "No." Hannah interrupted. "They wouldn't have. Did you see all those people on the floor? The ones who closed their eyes and hoped the danger would pass them by? I don't blame them. That's a normal human response to violence. But you ran toward it. You put yourself in harm's way for someone you didn't even know." Her eyes glistened slightly. "So thank you." The lawyer cleared his throat. "Miss Clark, perhaps we should let Mr. Flynn rest and discuss the other matters." "In a minute, David." Hannah waved him off, her attention never leaving Garrett. "The police want to talk to you, obviously. They have questions about what happened. So does the FBI, apparently, because it turns out those attackers were professionals, former Russian special forces working as mercenaries for hire. 3 of them are in custody, 2 are in the hospital, and 2 escaped." "Do they know who hired them?" Hannah's expression darkened. "We're working on it. The prevailing theory is corporate espionage, someone trying to kidnap me for information about Nexus's security protocols or to leverage me against the company. My head of security has some suspects, but nothing concrete yet." "Patricia, is she—" "She'll be fine. Bruised ego more than anything. She's furious she got taken down so easily." Hannah smiled slightly. "She's also insisting I hire you as personal security, which brings me to why I've been waiting here for 3 hours." Garrett tensed. "I'm not interested in security work. I figured you'd say that, but hear me out anyway." Hannah leaned forward, her hands clasped in her lap. "Someone wants to hurt me, Garrett. Someone with enough money and connections to hire Russian mercenaries and plan an attack at one of the most secure venues in San Diego. They failed tonight, but they'll try again. And next time, they'll be better prepared. They'll know I have protection. They'll plan for contingencies. And they'll be even more dangerous. Hire a professional security firm. There are dozens in this city. I have professional security. They're excellent at their jobs. But they couldn't do what you did tonight. They don't have your training, your instincts, she searched for the word, your commitment to protecting people, even when it's not your job. I have a daughter, Garrett said quietly. She's 8 years old, and she's already lost her mother. I can't put myself in danger for a living anymore. I promised her I was done with that life." Hannah nodded slowly. "I understand, but can I ask you something? If you'd stayed behind the bar tonight, if you'd kept your head down and let those men take me, would you be able to look your daughter in the eye tomorrow? Would you be able to tell her you're the kind of man who walks away when someone needs help?" The words hit harder than any physical blow. Garrett closed his eyes, thinking about Zoe's face when she asked him questions about being brave, about doing the right thing even when it was hard, thinking about the values he was trying to instill in her, about the example he was setting. "That's not fair," he said. "No, it's not. But it's true." Hannah stood up, preparing to leave. "I'm not asking you to be a bodyguard, Garrett. I'm asking you to help me figure out who's behind this and stop them before someone gets killed. Temporary, specific mission parameters, just like the operations you used to run. After it's done, you go back to your life. But right now, I need someone I can trust. And after tonight, you're the only person who fits that description." She pulled a business card from her pocket and placed it on his bedside table. "Think about it. Take your time. But not too much time, because whoever tried to take me tonight isn't going to wait long before they try again." She moved toward the door, then paused. "Your daughter is lucky to have you, Garrett. You're a good man. That's rare." 3 days after the attack, Garrett found himself sitting in a conference room on the 42nd floor of the Nexus Technologies headquarters, wondering how his life had spiraled so far off the carefully planned trajectory he'd mapped out for himself and Zoe. The view through the floor-to-ceiling windows was spectacular, the San Diego skyline stretching toward the Pacific, sailboats dotting the bay like white triangles against the blue water. But Garrett wasn't looking at the view. He was studying the files spread across the polished conference table, each one representing a potential threat to Hannah Clark's life. "These are the primary suspects," Patricia Vance said, tapping a folder with her pen. Her arm was still in a sling from the attack, but her demeanor was all business. "Viktor Kozlov, Russian oligarch with ties to the mercenary group that attacked the gala. He's been shorting Nexus stock for 6 months, betting the company will collapse. A successful kidnapping would have tanked our market value and made him millions." Garrett opened the folder, scanning the intelligence brief inside. Kozlov's face stared back at him from a surveillance photo, late 50s, expensive suit, cold eyes that had seen too much of the world's ugliness. Has he made any moves since the attack failed? Nothing overt. But our tech team traced some encrypted communications from his organization to a location here in San Diego. We think he's got people on the ground, planning a second attempt. Patricia moved to the next folder. Then there's Richard Brennan, Hannah's ex-husband. He walked away from the divorce with a settlement that most people would consider generous, but he's been vocal about feeling cheated. Claims he contributed to Nexus's success and deserves more. Does he have the resources to hire mercenaries? His family does. Old Boston money, connections everywhere. And he's been making noise about how Hannah's safety protocols are inadequate, how the company would be better off with different leadership. Patricia's expression suggested what she thought of that theory. He's got motive and means, but the timeline doesn't quite work. The attack planning started before the divorce was finalized. The door opened and Hannah walked in, carrying 3 coffee cups balanced expertly in her hands. She'd traded the sweatshirt for professional attire, charcoal slacks and a silk blouse, but she still looked tired, shadows under her eyes that makeup couldn't quite hide. "Sorry, I'm late. Board meeting ran long." She distributed the coffees and sat down across from Garrett. "Patricia catching you up on our rogues gallery?" "Just getting to the interesting parts," Garrett said, accepting the coffee with a nod of thanks. He noticed Hannah had remembered how he took it black. No sugar from a brief conversation 3 days ago. Small details, the kind that revealed someone who paid attention. "The most interesting part," Hannah said, pulling up a chair, "is that we don't actually know who's behind this. Could be Kozlov, could be Richard, could be someone else entirely. Nexus has made a lot of enemies in the tech world. Our encryption software has put traditional security firms out of business. Our financial algorithms have disrupted established banking systems. We've testified against big tech monopolies in congressional hearings." She sipped her coffee. "The list of people who'd benefit from my disappearance or death is uncomfortably long." Garrett studied her face, noting the tension in her jaw, the way her fingers drummed against the coffee cup, nervous energy seeking outlet. "You're taking this remarkably well." "Am I?" Hannah laughed, but there was no humor in it. "Inside, I'm terrified. Every car that follows me too long, every stranger who looks at me twice, every unexpected phone call, I jump. But I can't let it show, because I've got 12,000 employees counting on me to keep this company stable, and if I fall apart, everything we've built falls apart with me. That's a lot of weight for one person to carry. Welcome to being a CEO. She set down her coffee cup and met his eyes directly, which is why I need your help, not just as protection, but as someone who understands strategy and threat assessment. Patricia's excellent, but she's not a hunter. Garrett finished. She's defensive, reactionary. You need someone who thinks like the enemy. Exactly. Hannah leaned forward. I've read your service record, Garrett. Or at least the parts that aren't classified. You've run operations in hostile territory, identified and neutralized threats, protected high-value targets in situations where everything could go wrong in seconds. That's what I need now. Garrett was quiet for a long moment, turning the coffee cup in his hands. Finally, he said, I need to know something first. Why me? You could hire former Delta Force operators, ex-Secret Service agents, people with more recent experience in executive protection. Why trust someone you met 3 days ago? Hannah's expression softened. Because when those men came for me, you didn't hesitate. You didn't calculate the odds or weigh the risks. You saw someone in danger and you acted. That kind of instinct, that kind of character, you can't fake it and you can't train it. It's either in you or it's not. She paused. And because when you looked at me that night at the gala, before everything went wrong, you saw me. Not the CEO. Not the billionaire. Just me. Do you have any idea how rare that is? The vulnerability in her voice caught Garrett off guard. He'd built up an image of Hannah Clarke as this untouchable titan of industry. But sitting across from her now, he saw something different, a woman who'd sacrificed everything for success and was only now realizing the cost. It reminded him uncomfortably of himself, of the years he'd spent chasing the next mission, the next objective, while Sarah had tried to build a life they could share. I have one condition, Garrett said. My daughter comes first, always. If there's a conflict between keeping you safe and being there for Zoe, she wins. Every time. I wouldn't want it any other way. Hannah smiled, and for the first time since the attack, it reached her eyes. Actually, I was hoping I could meet her. If that's okay with you. Garrett raised an eyebrow. Why? Because you clearly love her more than anything in the world. And I want to understand what drives you. Plus, she added with a hint of mischief, I'm curious about the 8-year-old who thinks purple is a happy color. That evening, Garrett brought Zoe to Hannah's office. He'd been nervous about the meeting, unsure how his daughter would react to being thrust into the orbit of someone like Hannah Clarke. But Zoe, being Zoe, approached it with her characteristic fearlessness. You're really tall, Zoe announced, walking right up to Hannah with wide-eyed wonder. And pretty, like a princess. But the kind who runs a kingdom, instead of waiting to be rescued. Hannah laughed, genuinely delighted. That might be the best compliment I've ever received. And you must be Zoe. Your dad tells me you're an artist. I like to draw. Zoe pulled out her ever-present sketchbook and flipped to a recent page. This is my dad fighting the bad guys. I made him extra strong and gave him a cape, but he says real heroes don't wear capes because they get caught in things. Hannah took the sketchbook carefully, studying the crayon, drawing with the seriousness it deserved. The picture showed a stick figure Garrett surrounded by black-clad attackers, with a woman in a blue dress behind him. The proportions were childlike, but the emotion was clear: protection, bravery, danger. This is remarkable, Zoe. You captured the moment perfectly. He promised me he wouldn't do dangerous stuff anymore after Mom died. Zoe said matter-of-factly, the way kids do when they haven't learned to hide their feelings behind social niceties. But then he did it anyway because you needed help. Are you going to make him do more dangerous stuff? The question hung in the air. Garrett tensed, ready to intervene, but Hannah knelt down to Zoe's level, meeting her eye to eye. I hope not, Hannah said honestly. But there are some bad people who want to hurt me. And your dad is one of the few people who can help keep me safe. I promise you this, though I will never ask him to do anything that would take him away from you. You're the most important person in his world, and I respect that." Zoe considered this with the gravity of a Supreme Court justice weighing evidence. "Okay, but if you break your promise, I'm going to be very disappointed in you." "That's fair." Hannah offered her hand, and Zoe shook it solemnly. "Deal." Later, after Zoe had fallen asleep on the office couch exhausted from exploring every corner of the executive floor, Hannah and Garrett sat in the adjacent lounge, separated from the main office by a glass partition that let them keep an eye on the sleeping girl. "She's wonderful," Hannah said softly. "You're raising an incredible human being." "I'm trying. Some days I feel like I have no idea what I'm doing." Garrett watched Zoe's chest rise and fall with the steady rhythm of sleep. Sarah was the natural parent. She always knew the right thing to say, the right way to handle every situation. "I'm just improvising and hoping I don't screw up too badly." "Can I ask what happened?" "Patricia mentioned she died in an accident." Garrett was quiet for a long moment. He didn't talk about Sarah often. Found it too painful to excavate those memories. But something about Hannah's presence, her genuine interest, made it easier. "I was on deployment, some unnamed country, doing some unnamed thing. Sarah was driving home from her nursing shift at the hospital. A drunk driver ran a red light going 60 in a residential zone. His voice remained steady, but his hands clenched into fists. She died instantly. I got the notification while I was halfway around the world, unable to get home, unable to be there for Zoe when she needed me most. I'm so sorry. I came home to a 5-year-old who didn't understand why mommy wasn't coming back, and a career that required me to leave again in 6 weeks. I did one more deployment, but the whole time I was gone, all I could think about was Zoe growing up without either parent. So I resigned, walked away from the only life I'd ever known, and tried to figure out how to be a single dad in the civilian world." Hannah reached across the space between them and placed her hand over his. The gesture was simple, unburdened by ulterior motive, just human connection. "For what it's worth, I think you're doing an amazing job. That little girl in there is happy, confident, creative. She feels safe and loved. That doesn't happen by accident." Garrett looked at their hands, hers, small and soft against his scarred and calloused, and felt something shift in his chest, a wall beginning to crack that he'd spent 2 years building. "What about you? The files say you were married, but they don't say much else." Hannah withdrew her hand, but not abruptly, just a natural return to her own space. "Richard and I met in graduate school. He was charming, ambitious, smart. We built Nexus together, or at least that's what I thought we were doing. Turns out he was building resentment while I was building a company." She stared at her reflection in the window, her expression distant. "He wanted me to be successful, but not more successful than him. Wanted me to be ambitious, but not too ambitious. When Nexus took off and I became the face of the company, it destroyed his ego. The divorce was ugly. He tried to claim he'd contributed essential IP, that he deserved half of everything. It wasn't about the money. His family has more than they could spend in 3 lifetimes. It was about punishing me for overshadowing him." "Do you really think he's behind the attack?" "Honestly, I don't know. The Richard I married wouldn't hurt anyone. But the Richard the first divorced was someone I didn't recognize." She turned back to Garrett. "That's what scares me most. Not knowing who wants me dead. Not knowing who to trust. It's like fighting an enemy you can't see." "Then we make them visible," Garrett said. "We set a trap, draw them out, force them to reveal themselves." Hannah's eyes lit with interest. "What did you have in mind?" "You said Nexus is about to announce a major partnership, something that would significantly increase the company's value. What if we leak false information about when and where that announcement will happen? Create a scenario where you're vulnerable, where an attack would have maximum impact. Then we control the environment and see who takes the bait." "Use me as bait, you mean?" "Use you as bait with me as the trap." Garrett leaned forward. I've run operations like this before. It's dangerous, but it's controllable. We set the parameters, choose the location, stack every advantage in our favor. And when they come, because they will come, we'll be ready. Hannah studied him for a long moment, and Garrett could see the wheels turning behind those intelligent green eyes, weighing risks against rewards, fear against necessity. Finally, she nodded. Okay, let's do it. But we do it smart. We do it carefully. And if at any point it looks like someone's going to get hurt, we abort. I'm not risking your life or anyone else's for an operation that goes sideways. He extended his hand. Partners? Hannah shook it firmly. Partners. Neither of them noticed Patricia Vance watching through the security monitors in the adjacent room, her expression troubled as she picked up her phone and sent a carefully worded text message to an encrypted number. Some partnerships, she thought grimly, were more dangerous than the threats they were meant to address. The plan came together over the next week, with military precision. Hannah would announce the partnership with a major European financial institution at a private event held at the Coronado Yacht Club, a venue chosen specifically for its controlled access points and clear sightlines. The announcement would be leaked through channels they knew were compromised, ensuring whoever wanted to stop Hannah would know exactly when and where to strike. Garrett spent those days conducting reconnaissance, mapping every entrance and exit, identifying potential threats, and building a security protocol that would make Fort Knox look casual by comparison. But the operation planning was only part of what was happening between them. Working in close proximity, spending long hours reviewing security footage and threat assessments, Garrett and Hannah began to develop a rhythm, a partnership that went beyond professional collaboration. They learned each other's patterns, how Hannah got quiet when she was processing something difficult, how Garrett's jaw tightened when he spotted a security vulnerability. They shared meals, traded stories, and slowly, carefully, began to dismantle the walls they'd each built around their wounded hearts. It was Zoe who first noticed the change. One evening, while Garrett was reviewing floor plans in Hannah's office, his daughter looked up from her drawing and announced, "You smile more now, Daddy." Garrett glanced up, startled. "What?" "You smile more when you're with Hannah." Zoe's expression was serious, assessing. "It's nice. You were sad for a long time after Mommy died, but now you're not as sad." The observation hit Garrett with unexpected force. He hadn't realized how much he'd been carrying that grief, how it had colored every interaction, every moment. But Zoe was right, something had shifted. Hannah's presence, her sharp mind and unexpected humor, her vulnerability beneath the CEO armor, had created space for something other than sorrow. Hannah, who'd been working on her laptop across the room, looked up at Zoe's words. Her eyes met Garrett's, and in that moment, something unspoken passed between them. Acknowledgement, possibility, fear. "Your dad has a great smile," Hannah said softly. "He should use it more often." The day of the operation arrived with clear skies and perfect weather, the kind of beautiful California afternoon that made tourists fall in love with San Diego and locals forget why they ever complained about housing prices. The Coronado Yacht Club was elegant without being ostentatious, its white colonial architecture gleaming against the blue backdrop of the bay. Sailboats bobbed at their moorings, and seabirds wheeled overhead, crying to each other in voices that carried across the water. Garrett arrived 3 hours early, conducting a final security sweep with Patricia and a team of carefully vetted security personnel. They'd placed plainclothes officers at every entrance, installed additional surveillance cameras, and established communication protocols that would allow instant response to any threat. On paper, it was perfect. In practice, Garrett knew that no plan survived first contact with the enemy. "You seem nervous," Patricia observed as they checked the rooftop access for the third time. "I'm always nervous before an operation. Keeps me sharp." "Is that all it is?" Patricia's tone was carefully neutral, but there was something underneath it, a subtext Garrett couldn't quite identify. "Or is it because this time, it's personal?" Garrett turned to face her fully. "What are you suggesting?" I'm suggesting that you care about Hannah. More than just a professional obligation. Patricia met his gaze steadily. Matt, I'm not judging Garrett, but personal feelings cloud judgment. I've seen it happen, and it gets people killed. I won't let anything happen to her. That's exactly what I mean. You can't guarantee that. None of us can. The best we can do is minimize risk and respond effectively when things go wrong. She paused. Just promise me you'll keep your head in the game. Don't let emotion override training. Garrett nodded, but Patricia's words stayed with him as he completed his preparations. Was she right? Had he let his feelings for Hannah compromise his tactical judgment? He'd been trained to maintain emotional distance, to see assets as assets rather than as people, but that clinical detachment had never come naturally to him. It was why he'd been effective in the field. He cared about the people he protected, fought harder because they mattered to him. But it was also why he'd left, because caring that much, losing people who mattered, had nearly destroyed him. Hannah arrived an hour before the event, looking stunning in a navy dress that was professional yet elegant. But Garrett could see the tension in her shoulders, the way her smile didn't quite reach her eyes. He pulled her aside before she entered the main reception area. You don't have to go through with this, he said quietly. We can call it off right now, find another way. No. Hannah's voice was firm. I'm tired of being afraid, tired of letting whoever's behind this control my life. If they want to come for me, let them come. At least this way, we're ready. Hannah. She placed her hand on his chest, and even through his suit jacket, he could feel the warmth of her touch. I trust you, Garrett. I trust that you'll keep me safe. And I trust that no matter what happens today, we're in this together. The certainty in her voice, the absolute faith she placed in him, was both humbling and terrifying. He covered her hand with his own. Together, he agreed. The event began smoothly. Guests arrived carefully screened and vetted and circulated through the yacht club's elegant spaces, sipping champagne and networking with the practiced ease of people accustomed to wealth and influence. Hannah worked the room like the professional she was, charming investors and partners, her public persona firmly in place. Only Garrett, watching from his position near the bar, could see the micro-expressions that revealed her underlying anxiety, the quick glance toward the exits, the way her hand occasionally touched her phone, ready to call for help. The announcement was scheduled for 6 o'clock, timed to catch the evening news cycle. At 5:45, Hannah took the small stage that had been set up overlooking the marina. The crowd gathered, champagne flutes in hand, and Garrett's senses went into overdrive, scanning faces, tracking movements, looking for anything out of place. That's when he saw him, a waiter, moving through the crowd with a tray of hors d'oeuvres, but his eyes weren't on the guests, they were on Hannah. And his posture, the way he moved, was all wrong. Too controlled, too aware. Garrett's hand went to his concealed weapon as he started moving toward the stage. North side, waiter with the crab cakes, he said into his comm unit. He's wrong. Intercept and detain. But before security could respond, the waiter dropped his tray and reached into his jacket. Garrett was already running, crossing the distance between him and Hannah in seconds that felt like hours. He saw the gun, saw the man's finger tightening on the trigger, and threw himself in front of Hannah just as the shot rang out. The bullet hit Garrett in the shoulder, not the clean through and through of movies, but a tearing, burning impact that spun him halfway around. He stayed on his feet through sheer willpower, returning fire with his own weapon, hitting the shooter's center mass. The man went down as chaos erupted around them, screaming guests, security converging, Patricia shouting orders into her radio. Garrett felt Hannah's hands on him, heard her voice cutting through the noise. Garrett, oh God, you're hit. Somebody call an ambulance. I'm okay, he managed, though blood was already soaking through his shirt. Are you hurt? No, I'm fine. But you're not. Her voice broke, and he saw tears streaming down her face. Why did you do that? Why did you? Because I care about you. The words came out without thought, stripped of pretense by pain and adrenaline. because somewhere between bartending and battle plans, I fell for you, and I couldn't stand by and watch you get hurt." Hannah's eyes widened, and for a moment, even the chaos around them seemed to fade. Then she leaned down and kissed him, fierce and desperate and real, before pulling back to apply pressure to his wound, with hands that shook but didn't falter. "Don't you dare die on me, Garrett Flynn. Don't you dare." Paramedics arrived, and the scene devolved into controlled chaos. But as they loaded Garrett onto a stretcher, he kept his eyes on Hannah, and she never looked away. Later, after the surgery, after the police interviews and the media frenzy, after everything had settled into the strange calm that follows violence, Hannah sat beside his hospital bed and held his hand. "The shooter's name was Thomas Brennan," she said quietly. "Richard's cousin. He confessed everything, said Richard hired him to make it look like Kozlov's people, a double frame-up that would eliminate me and shift blame away from the family. So it's over?" "The immediate threat, yes. Richard's been arrested. But there are always more threats, more people who see me as an obstacle or a target." She squeezed his hand gently. "I can't ask you to stay in this world, Garrett. Not when it almost got you killed. You're not asking. I'm choosing." He met her eyes with complete clarity. "I spent 2 years hiding from who I am, pretending I could be someone else. But today reminded me I'm someone who runs toward danger, who protects people, who stands between threats and innocence. That's not going to change. The only question is whether I do it alone or with someone worth protecting beside me." Hannah's breath caught, and fresh tears spilled down her cheeks. "You already have someone worth protecting. Zoe needs you. Zoe needs me to be the man I'm teaching her to be. Brave, principled, willing to fight for what matters." He pulled Hannah closer with his good arm. "And you matter, Hannah. You matter to me." "I love you," she whispered. "I didn't expect to, didn't want to, but I do. I love you too." And saying, it felt like coming home after a long deployment, like finding something he'd thought was lost forever. They kissed again, slower this time, a promise rather than a desperate plea. And in that hospital room, with monitors beeping and the sunset painting the sky orange through the windows, 2 broken people found a way to be whole together. 6 months later, the community center opened in one of San Diego's most underserved neighborhoods. The building had once been an abandoned warehouse, but months of renovation had transformed it into something beautiful, bright, open spaces filled with computers and art supplies. A gymnasium with clean floors and functioning equipment, classrooms with new desks and modern technology. The sign above the entrance read, "The Sarah Flynn Community Center," named after Garrett's late wife, whose nursing work had always been driven by a desire to help those whom society had forgotten. Garrett stood in the main atrium, watching families explore the various spaces, parents signing their teenagers up for coding classes, younger ones gravitating toward the art room, where Zoe was already organizing supplies with the bossy efficiency of someone who took her volunteer duties seriously. The center was a joint project between Nexus Technologies and a new foundation Garrett had established using his military benefits and a significant personal investment from Hannah. It wasn't about charity, it was about opportunity, about giving people the tools they needed to build better lives. Hannah appeared at his elbow, slipping her hand into his with the casual intimacy that had become second nature over the past months. "There must be 200 people here. I'd call that a successful opening. Patricia's security team is having a heart attack." Garrett observed with amusement, watching the harried security personnel trying to maintain protocols while children ran past them, chasing each other. "I think she's regretting agreeing to keep a low profile today. She'll survive. Besides, this was important, showing that we're not locked behind gates and security cordons, that we're actually part of the community." Hannah leaned her head against his shoulder. "I know you were worried. This was just another rich person vanity project. But look at their faces. This matters to them." She was right. The families moving through the center had an energy that went beyond polite gratitude. There was genuine hope in their expressions, excitement about the possibilities opening up. The center offered free after-school programs, job training, computer literacy courses, and mentorship from professionals in various fields. It was exactly what the neighborhood needed, and the response had been overwhelming. A woman approached them, maybe late 30s, with tired eyes but a warm smile. "Are you Mr. Flynn?" "Yes, ma'am. I wanted to thank you. My son, Miguel, he's been talking about your coding class non-stop. Says he's going to build video games when he grows up." She laughed. He's never been excited about school before, never thought there was a path for him. But now, he's got hope. That's a gift you can't put a price on. Garrett felt his throat tighten with emotion. "Miguel's welcome here anytime. We're going to be running programs year-round, and we've got scholarships available for summer intensives." After the woman moved on, Hannah squeezed his hand. "You're good at this. Better than you think. I just understand what it's like to need a second chance." He looked around the center, thinking about the journey that had brought him here. "After Sarah died, I was lost. Didn't know how to be a father, didn't know how to live in the civilian world. I was just surviving, day to day. But this," he gestured at the bustling center, "this gives me purpose beyond just protecting people. It's about building something that lasts." The past 6 months had been transformative for both of them. After Richard's arrest, Hannah had stepped back from the day-to-day operations of Nexus Technologies, promoting her COO to handle the corporate responsibilities, while she focused on what she called meaningful impact work. She'd established educational partnerships, funded technology initiatives in developing countries, and worked with Garrett to create programs that bridged the gap between military veterans and civilian careers. Their relationship had deepened through the shared work, through late nights planning initiatives and early mornings teaching classes. Hannah had become a fixture in Garrett and Zoe's life, joining them for dinner several nights a week, helping with homework, attending school events. And Zoe, with the adaptability of youth, had embraced Hannah as someone important, someone who wasn't trying to replace her mother but was adding something new and valuable to their family unit. Patricia appeared, looking mildly frazzled but professional as always. "Miss Clark, the mayor's here for the ribbon-cutting ceremony. We should probably get you to the stage." "We'll be right there." After Patricia left, Hannah turned to Garrett. "I'm nervous. What if I say something stupid?" "You never say anything stupid. You're the smartest person I know." He kissed her forehead. "Just speak from the heart. Tell them why this matters." The ribbon-cutting ceremony drew a large crowd to the entrance of the center. Local politicians, community leaders, and media had shown up, drawn by Hannah's celebrity and the unusual nature of the partnership between a tech billionaire and a former Navy SEAL. But as Hannah stepped up to the microphone, Garrett could see her transform into the poised, confident leader who'd built a company from nothing. "Thank you all for being here today," she began. "6 months ago, I nearly died at a charity event, saved by a man who had every reason to walk away, but chose to run toward danger instead. That night changed my life, in ways I'm still discovering, but the most important change was this. I realized that success without purpose is just accumulation. Money without meaning is just numbers in an account. And power without responsibility is just selfishness dressed up in expensive clothes." She gestured toward the center behind her. "This building represents a different kind of investment. Not in market share or stock prices, but in human potential. In the belief that every person, regardless of their zip code or circumstances, deserves access to the tools that can transform their lives. We've partnered with schools, businesses, and community organizations to create something sustainable, something that will still be here long after the headlines fade and the cameras move on to the next story." Hannah paused, her eyes finding Garrett in the crowd. "This center is named after Sarah Flynn, a woman I never had the privilege of meeting, but whose legacy lives on in the man she loved and the young lady she raised. Sarah believed in service, in using whatever gifts you have to help others. That belief is the foundation of everything we're trying to do here." She invited Garrett and Zoe to join her on the stage for the actual ribbon cutting. Zoe took her position seriously, gripping the comically oversized scissors with both hands while photographers captured the moment. When the ribbon fell away and the crowd applauded, Zoe turned and hugged Hannah with spontaneous affection. And Garrett saw Hannah's eyes fill with tears even as she smiled. Later, after the ceremony, after the tours and the interviews and the endless handshaking, Garrett found a quiet moment in what would become his office, a modest space with windows overlooking the gymnasium. Hannah appeared in the doorway, leaning against the frame with an expression of contentment he'd never seen before. "You did good, Flynn." "We did good," he corrected. "This doesn't happen without you, without Nexus's resources and your connections. And it doesn't happen without your vision and your understanding of what people actually need." She entered the office and wrapped her arms around him, from behind, resting her chin on his shoulder. "I've been thinking about something. Dangerous hobby." She swatted his arm playfully. "I want to step down as CEO of Nexus. Not immediately, but within the year. I want to focus on this kind of work full-time, the foundation, the community programs, the initiatives that actually change lives rather than just disrupting markets." Garrett turned in her arms to face her. "That's a huge decision. Are you sure?" "I've never been more sure of anything. The company will be fine without me, better than fine, probably. But this work, building something that matters with someone I love, that's what I want my legacy to be." She smiled. "Besides, someone needs to make sure you don't work yourself to death trying to save everyone." "I'm not trying to save everyone, just the ones I can reach." "See? That's exactly the attitude that's going to burn you out without someone to keep you balanced." She kissed him softly. "Let me be that someone, Garrett. Let's build this life together, the messy, complicated, beautiful life where we're partners in everything." "What about Zoe? This changes our whole dynamic." "I know. And I want to talk to her about it. Make sure she's comfortable with me being a more permanent part of your lives. I'm not trying to replace Sarah. She knows that. We both know that." Garrett cupped Hannah's face in his hands. "Sarah will always be Zoe's mother, will always be the love of my youth, but you're the love of my future, the person I choose to build the rest of my life with. If you're sure this is what you want, then yes, let's do this together." That evening, the three of them sat on the beach near Coronado, watching the sunset paint the sky in shades of orange and purple. Zoe built sandcastles with architectural complexity that suggested she'd inherited both her father's precision and her mother's creativity. Hannah and Garrett sat close together, his arm around her shoulders, her head resting against his chest. "Dad," Zoe called without looking up from her construction project, "is Hannah going to live with us now?" Garrett and Hannah exchanged glances, and he could see both nervousness and hope in her expression. "How would you feel about that, kiddo?" Zoe seemed to consider this carefully, patting sand into place around a castle tower. Finally, she looked up with her serious, assessing gaze. "I think it would be good. The house is too quiet sometimes, just us. And Hannah makes you laugh, which is important because you're too serious most of the time. Plus, she's teaching me about computers, and she doesn't get weird when I talk about Mom, which some grown-ups do." Hannah's eyes glistened with tears. "Thank you, Zoe. That means more to me than you know." "You're welcome. But I have rules." Zoe stood up and walked over to them, hands on her hips in a posture that was pure Garrett. "First, you have to like dogs because I want to get a dog. Second, you can't try to make me eat vegetables I genuinely hate, only the ones I'm being dramatic about. And third, you have to promise that even when you and Dad are being gross and romantic, you'll still have time for me." "I promise all three," Hannah said solemnly. "And I'll add a fourth rule. You can always tell me if something's bothering you. If I do something that makes you uncomfortable, or if you need space. This is your home first, and I'm a guest who's very grateful to be here." Zoe nodded, satisfied, and then surprised them both by hugging Hannah tightly. "Okay, you can stay." As the sun dipped below the horizon and the first stars appeared in the darkening sky, Garrett felt something he hadn't experienced in years: complete peace. Not the absence of danger or challenges, because those would always be present, but the bone-deep certainty that he was exactly where he was supposed to be, with the people he was meant to love, doing work that mattered. The journey from that violent night at the gala to this quiet evening on the beach had been unexpected and occasionally terrifying, but it had led him to a truth he'd forgotten in his grief, that healing doesn't mean forgetting, and moving forward doesn't dishonor the past. It simply means choosing to live, fully and bravely, with an open heart. 1 year after the ribbon-cutting ceremony, Garrett stood in the kitchen of the house. They now shared a beautiful craftsman-style home in Point Loma, with views of the bay and enough space for all of them to breathe. Morning light streamed through the windows, casting golden patterns across the hardwood floors as he prepared breakfast. The coffee maker gurgled companionably, and he could hear Hannah's voice drifting down from upstairs, helping Zoe get ready for the community center's annual showcase where his daughter would be presenting her coding project to an audience of potential mentors and sponsors. "Dad, have you seen my presentation notes?" Zoe called, thundering down the stairs with the graceless energy of a 9-year-old who'd grown 3 inches in the past year. "Kitchen table, right where you left them last night." Garrett flipped a pancake with practiced ease, amused by how domestic his life had become. The man who'd once conducted covert operations in hostile territory now worried about parent-teacher conferences and whether they had enough orange juice for breakfast. Hannah appeared moments later, looking effortlessly elegant even in jeans and a simple white shirt, her hair pulled back in a ponytail. She wrapped her arms around Garrett's waist from behind, pressing a kiss to his shoulder blade. "Good morning. Those pancakes better be the blueberry ones. Would I make any other kind on showcase day?" He turned his head to kiss her properly, savoring the simple intimacy of the moment. "Sleep okay?" "Better than okay. Though someone's daughter came into our room at 3 in the morning because she had a nightmare about her code not working." Hannah released him to pour coffee for them both. "We talked through the logic errors in her dream program until she fell back asleep. You're getting dangerously good at this parenting thing. I have an excellent teacher." She smiled at him, and Garrett was struck not for the first time by how much she'd changed over the past year. The exhaustion that had haunted her eyes was gone, replaced by genuine contentment. She'd kept her promise, stepping down as CEO of Nexus Technologies 6 months ago to focus full-time on the foundation work. The tech press had called it a shocking departure, but anyone who knew her understood it was actually a homecoming. A return to the values that had driven her to create technology in the first place. Helping people, solving real problems, making the world incrementally better. Zoe bounced back into the kitchen, notes in hand, and climbed onto her chair. "Can we go over my presentation one more time? I want to make sure I don't forget anything important." They spent breakfast running through her project, an app designed to help elderly people in the community stay connected with their families through simplified video calls and reminder systems. It was sophisticated work for someone her age, but Zoe had thrown herself into coding with the same intensity she brought to everything that captured her interest. The best part was her motivation, her genuine desire to solve a problem she'd identified when volunteering at the senior center attached to their community facility. "You're going to be amazing," Hannah assured her as they cleared the breakfast dishes. "And even if something goes wrong with the demo, you know what to do. Take a breath, explain the problem, and show how I'd fix it." Zoe recited, "Because mistakes are just learning opportunities in disguise." "Exactly." Garrett ruffled her hair affectionately. "Go get your shoes on. We leave in 20 minutes. After Zoe bounded off, Hannah turned to Garrett with a serious expression. "There's something I wanted to talk to you about before we get swept up in the day." His protective instincts immediately activated. "What's wrong?" "Nothing's wrong. Actually, something's very right." She took his hand, and he noticed her fingers were trembling slightly. "I got a call from the adoption agency yesterday. They have a teenage boy, 15 years old, who's been in the foster system for 3 years. His parents died in a boating accident, and he's been bounced around homes that weren't equipped to handle his trauma. He's got behavioral issues, struggles in school, the whole complicated package. Garrett's heart clenched. He knew where this was going, and the mixture of fear and hope that flooded through him was almost overwhelming. They asked if we'd consider being his foster family, potentially moving toward adoption if it's a good fit. Hannah's eyes searched his face. I know we haven't talked about this, and it's a huge decision, and we absolutely don't have to. Yes. The word came out without hesitation, surprising even himself. Yes? Just like that? Hannah, I've watched you over the past year transform from someone who thought success was measured in stock prices to someone who measures it in lives changed. I've seen you with Zoe, how patient you are, how you've learned to parent not by replacing what she had but by adding something new. He pulled her closer. And I know what it's like to lose everything and need someone to believe in you. If we can be that for this kid, then yes. Absolutely yes. Tears spilled down Hannah's cheeks, and she laughed through them. I was so nervous you'd think it was too soon, too much. It probably is too soon and definitely too much. But when has that ever stopped us? He kissed her forehead. We'll figure it out together. We always do. The showcase was held in the community center's main hall, transformed for the day with presentation booths and demonstration areas where students from various programs could display their work. The energy in the room was electric: teenagers showing off business plans, younger ones explaining science projects, adults presenting the results of job training programs. The mayor was there, along with local business leaders and representatives from tech companies looking to identify talent and offer opportunities. Garrett watched with pride as Zoe presented her app to a steady stream of visitors, explaining the technical challenges she'd overcome and the user testing she'd conducted at the senior center. She handled questions with confidence that reminded him so much of Hannah, and warmth that was pure Sarah. Seeing his two worlds blend so seamlessly in his daughter was both beautiful and bittersweet. She's exceptional, a voice said beside him. Garrett turned to find Patricia Vance, who'd remained head of security for Hannah even after the CEO transition and had become a friend rather than just a colleague. You and Hannah are raising someone special. We're trying. Garrett noticed Patricia's expression was contemplative. Something on your mind? I've been offered a position running security for a tech startup in Austin. It's a great opportunity, and normally I'd jump at it. She paused. But watching what you've all built here, seeing how you've created something that actually matters, it makes me question what I want my legacy to be. I spent 20 years in the FBI, chasing bad guys. Maybe it's time I spent some energy helping good people instead. We could always use someone with your skills here. The foundation is expanding, and we need people we trust. Garrett met her eyes. Think about it. No pressure, but the offer's there. Later, as the afternoon wound down and families began to leave, Garrett found Hannah standing alone in what had been his office, looking at the wall where they'd hung photos documenting the center's first year. Pictures of kids at computers, adults receiving job training certificates, community gatherings where neighbors who'd been strangers had become friends. In the center was the photo from opening day: Hannah, Garrett, and Zoe cutting the ribbon, all of them smiling with genuine joy. Penny for your thoughts, Garrett said, joining her. I was thinking about how lost I felt a year and a half ago. How I'd built this empire but felt completely empty inside, like I was living someone else's idea of success. She leaned into him when he wrapped his arm around her shoulders. And then you crashed into my life literally, given how that first night went, and everything changed. I could say the same. After Sarah died, I was just going through the motions, trying to be a good father, but feeling like I'd lost the part of myself that made me who I was. He gestured at the photos. This brought it back. Not the violence, not the adrenaline, but the purpose. The sense that what I do matters beyond just getting through another day. Hannah turned to face him fully, her hands resting on his chest. Marry me. Garrett's breath caught. What? Marry me. I know it's supposed to be the other way around, and I'm completely ruining any romantic proposal you might have been planning. But I don't want to wait. I want to build this life with you officially, legally, permanently. I want to adopt that teenage boy together as a married couple. I want Zoe to know that we're committed to being a family, not just trying it out." Her voice wavered slightly. "I want to be your wife, Garrett Flynn. Will you marry me?" For a moment, Garrett couldn't speak around the emotion clogging his throat. Then he pulled a small velvet box from his jacket pocket and opened it to reveal a simple but elegant ring, a sapphire surrounded by small diamonds. "I was planning to ask you tonight, after we got home and put Zoe to bed." Had this whole speech prepared about second chances and building futures. Hannah stared at the ring, then at him, and started laughing through her tears. "We're ridiculous. Completely ridiculous." He took the ring from the box and slid it onto her finger. "Yes, Hannah Clark, I will absolutely marry you. Today, tomorrow, whenever you want. Because you're the best decision I never knew I was looking for." They kissed as the late afternoon sun painted the office in shades of amber and gold, and through the window, they could see Zoe in the courtyard below, surrounded by new friends, laughing about something with the unself-conscious joy of someone who felt safe and loved and hopeful about the future. That evening, after telling Zoe the news which prompted excited squealing and immediate demands to help plan the wedding, they sat together on the back porch, watching the lights of the city twinkle against the darkening sky. The dog they'd gotten 2 months ago, a rescue named Captain who'd bonded immediately with all of them, dozed at their feet. "What do you think Sarah would say?" Hannah asked quietly. "About all of this? About us?" Garrett considered the question carefully. He thought about his late wife often, but the grief had softened over time into something more like gratitude for the years they'd had together. "I think she'd say I was lucky to find love twice in one lifetime. And she'd probably make some joke about how you're way too good for me, and I better not screw it up. She sounds like she was smart. The smartest. Just like you." He pulled Hannah closer. "I used to think moving on from her death meant forgetting her or betraying her memory. But I've learned that's not how love works. The heart doesn't have a limited capacity. It expands to hold whatever you're willing to give it room for." They sat in comfortable silence, and Garrett reflected on the improbable journey that had brought them to this moment. From that chaotic night at the gala, when he'd been just a bartender trying to stay invisible, through violence and recovery, through learning to trust again and building something meaningful together. They'd taken their individual broken pieces and forged them into something stronger than either of them could have created alone. The future stretched ahead, full of challenges they couldn't anticipate, and joys they hadn't yet imagined. There would be hard days, moments of doubt, obstacles that seemed insurmountable, but they'd face all of it together. Garrett, with his protective instincts and hard-won wisdom. Hannah, with her brilliant mind and generous heart. Zoe with her creativity and courage, and soon, a teenage boy who needed to learn that family wasn't just about blood, but about people who chose to show up for each other, day after day, in all the small and significant ways that actually mattered. As stars began to appear in the darkening sky and the city settled into its evening rhythms, Garrett felt a profound sense of peace. Not because life was perfect or problems had disappeared, but because he'd finally learned the truth that had eluded him for so long. That strength wasn't about standing alone, that courage sometimes meant letting people in, and that the greatest missions weren't fought on distant battlefields but in the quiet daily choice to love, to serve, and to build something that would outlast your own story. He was exactly where he was supposed to be, doing exactly what he was meant to do, surrounded by people who'd become his reason for everything. And that was more than enough. It was everything. Up next, you've got 2 more standout stories right on your screen. If this one hit the mark, you won't want to pass these up. Just click and check them out. And don't forget to subscribe and turn on the notification bell so you don't miss any upload from us.